Hamja to the stage to talk to us about the power of zines.
I've been sitting nervously in the front row thinking, what is this academic presentation I've just written. So the first slide is going to be on. The power of zines. So my name's Hamja. I run this festival called DIY Cultures, which is an annual festival that looks at the intersections of art and activism and DIY culture and how that can apply to everything from the way we organise to the way we live to the way we build things, so you're not swallowed up by Trotskyist parties all the time when doing activism. The next slide. So you notice when you go to activist festivals, it's often the same person with a book deal with Verso or Owen Jones. And, so my attempt, I was unemployed for most of the time whilst doing my festival, which has been going for the last 5 years. You take all over the rich mix, and at the most down-to-earth level, you know, a zine is a cheap photocopied publication, but every zine editor imagines that they're a guerrilla army ready to overthrow capitalism. So instead of having Owen Jones and Tara Kelly and the that literary festival class of the leftists, I just invited 7 unemployed people. And this is my favourite zine, which is written on the back of an unemployed signing on thing, which a lot of out of work art students often get themselves into. So next slide. So I'm going to go right into the deep end. So the outlet David versus Goliath battle of our times is Hillsborough, and I think we should give a round of applause for the to remember the sort of sacrifice and courage and everything that the Hillsborough campaign, which makes a better state for all of us. One of the most disgusting moments in the British media was the front page of the Sun, where 96 football fans were killed, and hundreds injured, and thousands traumatised, and an entire city demonised. And this is part of the general Thatcherite battle against the working class. And you've seen Hillsborough in the news a lot, not just because after 28 years we're finally getting prosecutions of the police officers, who are the same people who designed things like Prevent and persecuted whole swathes of people. And it was actually in the fanzines that you saw the truth many, many decades before any of the mainstream. Actually, whilst we say Hillsborough now as a sort of way to denote injustice and fight a successful justice campaign, there were decades where nobody actually cared about Hillsborough. The mainstream would repeat the same lies. The entire city of Liverpool was given a sort of form of racism where the Scouser was sort of blamed from everything from child murder to killing their own families. And so it was in fanzines that you had this sort of attitude of resistance to the lies spread out. And within the police, you'd have this language used, which would be like penning and herding, so animal terminology to sort of look at football fans. Next slide. These are two of the classic things from the time. The End was done by someone called Peter Hooton, who wrote a song called All Together Now for the Italian 90s. And it was common to say, this is a common thing, so football is regarded as slum sport played in slum stadiums, increasingly watched by slum people who deter decent folk from turning up, and are seen as part of the enemy within, along with Irish Republicans, LGBT people, and the working class in general, the organised working class, the miners and so forth. And there was this language of managed population decline, and it wasn't just the Sun and stuff, it was also the Liberal Guardian and people like that, carrying on these sort of lies. And this is one of the zines that sort of campaigned against the ID card scheme and carried the truth, eyewitness accounts, testimony, solidarity with families, many decades before. These families will experience trauma, and I'm sure the Grenfell families are now and many people who had their families killed in custody or in prison, and fanzines were as a face-to-face way of creating small communities of solidarity, of keeping things going, and not being sort of swallowed up by bureaucracy or capitalism. Next slide. And finally they achieved victory, and Red Over the Land was one of the zines that's still going after 20 years. So you still have this culture of solidarity. If you want to look up further, look at this book called Hillsborough Voices, which is written by one of the survivors. Next slide. And at DIY Cultures this year, we commissioned a short film which was still touring, looking about how fanzines create solidarity. So come up with afterwards if you'd like to look further. Next slide. So zine culture there was a time before the internet, and The Enemy was actually something worth reading, and you'd see this subcultures, feminist subcultures around Riot Girl, Bikini Kill, which became La Tigra, and you had Charles Bukowski and William Burroughs and underground literature. We also had this subculture around the Manic Street Preachers when they were good 20 years ago. At times they were this sort of culture scene where people would first talk about self-mutilation, depression, and other things that I experienced in my teens. Next slide. So my whole reason I did DIY Cultures is because my brother was ripped from his family home in Tooting, South London, detained without trial for 6.5 years, or evidence, with a US extradition request, accused of terrorism charges by the US, even though he'd never been there, for marginal association with the website. Theresa May eventually did put him in a death row prison in solitary confinement, and boasted, wasn't it great to say goodbye at the Conservative Party conference that year. But Jeremy Corbyn would stand outside the courtroom with a megaphone campaigning for my brother. So whenever I see Prime Minister Question Time, the trauma replays itself. And it was through fanzines, and my brother was a big fan of Bikini Kill before he was arrested for terrorism offences, which we actually used in his favour to not having portrayed as an Al-Qaeda terrorist or someone dangerous. And he was set free in 2014 and he's home and safe. I learned an immense amount from the Hillsborough campaign and all other people who experience state and police violence. Next slide. Prisoner zines are awesome. Often, a lawyer and a heroic human rights lawyer can only do so much. So my brother was represented by Gareth Pearce, who you may know because he represented the Guildford 4, Birmingham 6, the Contamino cases, and so famous, she's played by Emma Thompson in the film In the Name of the Father. And so I'll just go through these zines. So this is a zine, because my brother was in solitary confinement, so it's prison in solitary confinement, writing for other prisoners in solitary confinement. In solitary confinement, you are kept 23 hours a day with no human contact apart from strip searches, with food slotted in your door. 50% of suicides of the US prisons occur in solitary confinement, and that was conditions my brother was put into whilst having assessed risk and suffering from Asperger's syndrome. Not Shut Up magazine, which is a zine made by prisoner teachers, art teachers, and Eric McDavid, who's one of the Green Scare prisoners, who makes zines himself in prison. And for Struggle Mag, there's a whole generation of forgotten about US political prisoners. We know Angela Davis, but we don't know all the people from that generation who were sort of under COINTELPRO, and many of them are editing their own zines in prison. And often the language of law and the Patriot Act and all these things, that it's sort of not good enough. We're always under this form of administrative or formalised oppression, and state oppression and bureaucratic oppression. And zines are a way of reclaiming sort of humanity. We need that. Next slide. This is some arty stuff I did, which I don't want to talk about. It's sort of the NGO. I have a thing against NGOs and the sort of the language of sort of charity and so forth. And these are a way of sort of mocking some of the authenticity. Next slide. And some more zines are made. Next slide. We're sort of trying to look at the geography of zines beyond Brighton and Berlin. So we're looking at zines from Pakistan, Malaysia, and so forth. Zines had a key part to play in me sort of reclaiming aspects of my mental health. So I as a diagnosed manic depressive, I could sort of reclaim aspects of what you might regard as disability, but as positive. So one of my favourite zine makers is the Icarus Project, and this is about suicidal episodes and someone I often call suicidal, and a way of thinking of it as a affirmative or affirmation of dignity. So I sort of re-author my depressions as my body's natural capacity to go on strike. And this is another zine by Icarus Project, a madness impression, looking at how, you know, it's not just biochemistry, it's also things like austerity. You know, all the people who are on the food banks, they are people, you know, we can draw a correlation with that and mental health and the Tory government. And I find it astonishing Theresa May is trying to claim this sort of concern about mental health, which is probably like damage on people's mental health and anyone else, even worse. I take the next slide. And just looking at things like the diagnostic manual, how we classify people, reclassify people, and build resistance to it. And there's a whole movement around neurodiversity. So people who have aspects of Asperger's syndrome or dyspraxia, claiming these as positive aspects of their identity, much the way sexuality is won't be seen as a disorder, but as part of your identity, and that's something else we look at. So this is a great thing about neurotypical. So next slide. So zines also influenced my whole politics, as well as being organising festivals and stuff. I consider myself leader of a political party like the Black Panthers, but for shy people. I'm struggling against, so it's a bit of product placement, by the way. So I'm struggling against extrovert supremacy. To build a national homeland called Aspergerstan, run under a revolutionary Sharia law system. So I go to these left-wing festivals and there's people that like jazz hands and gay clubbings, all these extroverted people, so this is how I communicate my politics. Next slide. Oh, that's what we're going to do. So that's zine makers. So we're not recluses and we're not like the margins, but we're actually a guerrilla army that's going to overthrow capitalism and white supremacy. Thank you.